All right. Welcome to my project Spread Positivity. My name is Megan, and I will be discussing mental health with Zionsville Community Schools social worker, Miss England. Thank you for meeting with me.
Yeah, no problem.
So, my first question is, how would you define the term mental health and along with that, mindfulness?
Yeah, so two big words that you probably hear a lot, but mental health can kind of be just general emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It's kind of our ability to think, act, and feel in ways that are congruent to our highest values. Mindfulness is often kind of the antidote to any sort of mental health concerns. You'll hear that thrown around a lot, but mindfulness is essentially being aware and present in the moment without allowing worries of the past or the present or the past or the future to kind of creep into that presently minded space. So a lot of times that looks like doing things that keep you focused on your senses. As well as physical things that kind of take you into your body rather than being stuck in your head. Um,
Cool. And what are some early warning signs of some mental health concerns?
mhm. So, first of all, it's normal to go through some ups and downs through life, and that's important. So, when we're thinking about these changes, we want to be thinking about things that are significant and consistent. So, um, changes in appetite are big, either eating more or eating less. The same with sleeping more or sleeping less. Um, Isolating from others is a big one, especially for someone that doesn't typically isolate. Some people just like to isolate, so that's important to remember. Avoiding things more often than you would. That can look like increased procrastination in students, more so than just like your typical senioritis, but like maybe not turning in a lot of assignments that you would have never done that before. um, Lack of motivation for school, and again, not just a little bit of lack of motivation, but pretty significant, as well as not being motivated or interested in the things that you normally would really enjoy. um, and decrease in energy levels kind of goes in hand with that sleep. um, And then obviously mood changes too. So consistent sadness, irritability. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily look like sadness, but getting easily annoyed, or feeling worthless or down or hopeless or even numb. Like I don't feeling like you don't really even feel any emotions at all. So those are some early signs.
How can you tell with high schoolers whose moods and feelings and emotions are constantly changing?
Yeah, that's a good point because part of it is developmental. You are changing, life is unpredictable, social life is changing constantly. Um, so that's when it is important to be asking questions and not just to make assumptions based on behavior. So trying to ask things, trying to get to the root of it. And while some teenagers would like to dismiss, like, it's no big deal, like really paying attention, if there's like significant reason to believe that this is a big change, um, I think it's worthwhile to pursue to, you know, ask those questions as well as like let a mental health professional ask those questions too.
What are some of those questions that should be asked, and what are things one should and shouldn't say to someone who's going through mental health struggles?
Mhm. So open-ended questions are good, not leading in any sort of direction. And this is tricky because sometimes we're like, so like you did this, like was that you trying? Were you being sad or stressed in this moment? Like don't project that onto them, but like really, have those open-ended questions as far as looking for those warning signs. But some things that you should do is if someone is expressing emotion to you, being able to validate and acknowledge that emotion and um, doing that first before offering any sort of advice. Hard not to just jump to the fix, but so often people just want you to be in that hard space of emotion with them, to hear that you are acknowledging that they're sad or scared or lonely or whatever it may be. And then if someone's sharing with you, to just thank them for sharing and thank them for being vulnerable and open. And then ask them what support looks like for them personally, because it looks different for everybody. So some people might want to want a hug, and some people might not. Some people might want to be asked when they're crying that they might want to be asked, and some people might want some space and time to process before they talk about it. So just letting people tell you what they need and doing that. And then for should not, don't be dismissive. So the kind of the opposite of acknowledging those feelings would be saying like, it's no big deal. So even if the problem or the emotion seems silly or unfounded, it's probably important to that person. So making sure that they feel like you hear them, even if it's, like I said, silly to you. And then don't offer like simple platitudes in response to people being upset. So that can kind of look like, it's everything happens for a reason. Especially, this can get especially, I think, tricky in religious contexts. So being careful by saying things like, well, have you prayed about it? Or just trust in God. Those are some things that happen sometimes with good intention, but can be harmful. And then never say like at least, because that can be dismissive. Like, like at least you, you have X, Y, and Z going on. At least this, like that's just automatically pretty dismissive.
Cool. And on top of that, how have these mental health issues changed over time, and how does that impact the way it should be addressed?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question, because things have changed. On a positive note, we definitely destigmatized mental health. So people are more likely to seek treatment and not feel ashamed for doing so. There's greater knowledge and access to these types of services, so that's great. However, I think mental health concerns are growing, and often social media is being acknowledged as a big driver of this, especially with teenage girls. But I think tech in general just kind of serves to disconnect us. And I think at the heart of healthy emotions is healthy connections. And so if we're feeling disconnected from the people around us, then we will feel poorly. We will feel sad. We will feel lonely. And that will kind of exacerbate anything that's already going on. There's just a lot of pressures in society today, pressures for teenagers that didn't exist 10, 20 years ago. There's division in our country, and I don't think that people often know how to connect with others in ways that, provide that really intimate connection that I think we're all seeking.
You mentioned technology and how that plays a huge role in mental health. Obviously we're using more technology than ever, especially during this pandemic, and how has that pandemic changed the way people think about mental health, or has changed people's mental health?
Yeah, so the pandemic changed a lot of things. Yes, you mentioned a lot of different. So yeah, we are able to connect via technology, which is great. But it's a limited connection. So, we miss things on Zoom. We miss body language. We miss just that feeling of being present with somebody. So in many ways, it's good in that regard. But I think in the pandemic, coming out of the health crisis, we have this mental health crisis, and I think people are aware of that. And a lot of therapy is happening over Zoom, which can be just as effective, and sometimes I think it can be less effective, especially for younger, like children and teenagers. I think that can be a less effective way to do therapy. But are you also kind of asking just about how the pandemic's affected mental health too?
Yeah, that too.
Okay. So, you know, I mentioned the mental health crisis, and I think some big things for that is these feelings of grief that we're all experiencing. So our life's changed in an instant, and that's important to acknowledge that we're all missing out on things, and especially teenagers. Teenagers are missing out on important things that they might have looked forward to for a really long time. And then I think we're we talked about that disconnection piece too. So even though we have this opportunity to connect with people over technology, it's not the same. There's not these little interactions that are occurring throughout our day between our classes. For teenagers, even for adults who go to work, like, there's moments in meetings where you can lean over and talk to the person next to you that doesn't exist on Zoom anymore. So I think we take for granted these little moments that really contribute to something bigger. And then obviously there's just pervasive anxiety about COVID, about the constant changes that I mentioned, about like not having consistency anymore. Things change all the time. Teenagers and younger children need that consistency that they're lacking. Yeah, we're all figuring out new norms everywhere we go. There's even social norms on Zoom, and some of us, it's kind of hard to figure out sometimes.
How would one during the pandemic, how should people find help, or like how should people, what habits are good to create during the pandemic that helps with mental health?
Yeah, some important things, and these things have gone around the internet too, but some important things is that consistency. So when that consistency is gone, developing that consistency. So, if you're working from home, getting up at the same time each day, showering, getting dressed, even if you want to stay in your pajamas and in your bed, like having a set place to go to do your work. I think exercise is more important than ever. We need to move, and if we're not moving, around our building, around the school, we need to get that movement in. Regardless, it's building serotonin and endorphins that we need. I think, yeah, staying connected with people, even if it is over Zoom, it's better than nothing. It's important. Going on social distanced walks, like a double whammy. You're connecting with somebody and you're getting exercise, getting outside, even when it's cold in January and February in Indiana. Still important to get out. So I think those are probably the biggest things.
That's good to know. And how does it affect different groups of people? Because I know that some are more likely, some are introverts, some are extroverted people, and like, how would you address mental health with different groups of people, I guess?
Yeah, and that's important to recognize that the pandemic affects everybody differently. And I would think that yes, some people, so extroverted people are probably having a little harder time, and that they're not getting their energy maybe from the same sources that they were. So from big groups, from parties, from going out, they're probably lacking in that way. Introverts probably are thinking, hey, this is for me, but really they're missing out on those connecting pieces too. So yeah, I think again, while this whole situation is not ideal for anybody, just continuing to get those pieces of connection in. And yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's the community doing to properly address mental health? Have you seen that?
Mhm. I think there is just this increasing trend towards, like I said, we are destigmatizing mental health. So there is an acknowledgement that we need um, we need services, we need these things in our schools. This position that I have, it didn't exist until 2 or 3 years ago. They brought social workers into Zionsville schools, and there's definitely a push for mental health awareness in schools and having those professionals available to students, which is great. So that's been really important. And then, yeah, we've just moved with policy to have, these positions available, to have um, greater access to mental health treatment for more people. It's expensive. It can be tricky to find. So the more, I think we've been pushing access, but there's always room to continue to grow in that way. So,
That's cool. Yeah, I've noticed, like, especially in the past few years, I've seen that too. And I've seen like mental health clubs and
mhm.
all that stuff at the school.
Yeah. Yeah, these things would never have existed 10, 20 years ago. But people are making the choice to destigmatize it, to normalize things like therapy, which is great. And all that does is help people see that it's normal to get help. It's normal to go through difficult times, and there is hope for that too.
Do you think that because of all these movements to make sure that mental health care is provided, do you think that we're seeing more issues of people having problems with mental health because um, they now have an outlet and they now are not afraid to show
Mhm.
that they are depressed or have anxiety?
Mhm. Yeah, I think the research is mixed on whether or not it's just because we've destigmatized it. It seems like we have a greater problem with it, that people are more likely to just to acknowledge the fact that they have a problem and seek help. So I think that is very legitimate to take into consideration. Um, but I think it's all good, and it's all important that we're um, learning, how to be more emotionally healthy, because the more emotionally healthy people are, the more emotionally healthy people there are in general, that will continue. People will have more positive interactions with one another, and everyone will be better off. So the destigmatization is just a really positive move across the board.
I have one last question on my list, and I was wondering if you could say something to someone going through mental health struggles. What would
Mhm.
you say to them?
Again, that it's normal. It's normal to go through hard things. You're not weird. You're not broken, and you're not alone. There's help. There's hope. There's healing. Um, I would tell them it is important to seek professional help for a lot of reasons. It can be really life changing, even if you're not going through something major. Um, being willing to do some self reflection and work on yourself, to have those tools for when something does happen, that you're more resilient in those moments. Um, and then going to therapy can be a really overwhelming process, especially when you don't know where to start. So I would tell someone to ask around for recommendations from people they trust, from people that are seeing somebody that they really like, because it can be hard to find a good connection with somebody. Um, and then when you do find a therapist, don't be afraid to speak up. If you're not feeling like you're getting what you're needing, or if you're not feeling heard, therapists should be willing to hear that feedback. And then if you're not finding it's a connection, like being willing to try someone somewhere else. It can be, that's what's really hard, is that it's hard when you're in those moments of mental health crisis or mental health difficulty, to add finding a therapist on top of that can be just one more thing. So kind of that's why it's good maybe to establish a relationship with a therapist, go once a month, go once every 2 months, so that when or if something does happen, you have that trust built with somebody, kind of on the preventative end.
I never thought of it as kind of a preventative thing. That's definitely helpful.
Yeah, yeah. It can be normal. Like we go to see a primary care doctor to check in and make sure that we're doing okay. I think it's good to have the same type of relationship with the therapist. Now, granted, if the resources and the access is available, because it's not for everyone, and that is part of what we need to push for on a broader, more policy level.
Is there anything else? I finished with my questions. Is there anything else that you'd like to add for any viewers that may be watching this?
No, I think you asked really, really great and thorough questions. So hopefully it'll be helpful to somebody.
Well, thank you so much for meeting with me and doing
No
this.
problem.
I know I definitely learned a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn. So we can all keep learning and keep working towards, a healthier society overall.